Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our weekly Parsha class. This week we're learning the portion of Vayeshev, and in Vayeshev we have the story of Yosef and his brothers and their attempt to kill him, and how at the end they instead sell him as a slave, and he ends up as a slave in Egypt. He is bought, just very briefly, a little bit of the story. Yosef is favored by his father, and his brothers are jealous. They don't like him. They hate him, actually, in the words of the Bible, and they plot to kill him. And one of the brothers, Reuben, persuades them to not, instead of killing him, they should throw him in a pit. And he had planned to take him out later. He's not there. They put him in a pit, and suddenly they see a caravan passing by on the way to Egypt, and they say, instead of killing him and letting him die in the pit, let's sell him, and that'll be the end of him, right? And we won't be guilty of killing him. They felt, I guess they had a conscience of that sort, and they knew that killing was wrong. So they decided they'll sell him, and they sold him, and he ends up in Egypt. And this is half the portion talks about Joseph. The first half of the portion talks about him before he's a slave, and how he served his father, and he had his dreams and so on. Once he gets to Egypt, over there, he's bought by a man called Potiphar. Potiphar is the chief of the butchers in Pharaoh's court, in his palace. And he brings him to his house. He buys him. He buys him as a slave, as a servant. And he is working now in Potiphar's house. In Potiphar's house, the Torah tells us, and I'm going to quote. It is Genesis chapter 39, verse 2 and 3, I'm reading. Vayhi Hashem here in English. God was with Joseph, and he became a successful man. And he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. His master saw that that God was with him, and that God granted success in everything he did. In other words, his master Potiphar sees that Joseph is exceptionally successful. In everything he does, God is successful, makes him successful. Then, in the end of the party, a little later, one day, we're told that his master's wife was impressed with Joseph, and she had a desire for him, and she would try to make advances on him, and he would refuse. And one day she played sick, and when her whole family was out on a holiday, they went to the house of worship, wherever the idols they used to worship, the gods. And she said she wasn't feeling well. She stayed home, and she felt that was her opportunity. Yosef comes home. She tries to seduce him. And when Yosef wasn't willing, and he ran out of the house, she then accused Joseph as having tried to violate her. She blamed the whole thing on Joseph. And as a result, the master throws him into prison. And there too, we're told that Joseph is highly successful in prison. And I'm going to quote you another verse. And that is in the same chapter, Genesis 39, verse 22 and 23, and I read, I quote, the warden of the prison placed all the prisoners who were within the prison in Joseph's charge. And whatever was done there was done under Joseph's direction. And here comes the key verse. The warden of the prison could not find fault in anything that was under Joseph's charge, for God was with him. And God granted him success in whatever, in everything. God granted him success. So, we have over here two descriptions. One in Joseph's house, in his master's house. He's bought by his master in Egypt. And Joseph is a slave there, a servant. And his master sees that Joseph is, exceptionally, he's a successful man. And that everything he does, Joseph gets his hands on, God makes it's successful, turns out to gold. And then later again, when he's thrown into prison, the warden of the prison sees that Joseph is highly successful, and over there it says that he put everything in his charge, and that whatever Joseph was involved with, he saw that God made successful. Okay, so we have two descriptions in this Torah portion that Joseph is a very successful man. All right? Now, I have a question to ask. Number one. Joseph wasn't born in Egypt, obviously. Joseph was living his life till he was 17 years old, and his father's in Israel, with his father, with his 11 brothers. A half a portion goes by which talks about Joseph and everything he did, and nowhere, even once, does it say that Joseph was successful. It doesn't describe him in terms of a successful man. Why does the Torah not mention, if it's such an important part that everything he does turns into gold and he's such a successful man, why does the Torah not say one word about Joseph's success before he ends up as a servant, a slave in Egypt? Only there he became successful. And over there, the Torah makes a point to mention that he is a highly successful individual, not only in his master's home, but also in the prison where he ended up. In both places, the Torah makes it a point to say, the man is a successful man. He's a ish matzliach. The guy has luck. Yet, before he ends up in Egypt, where he would be free, where he's his own man, he can do whatever he wants. You would think that over there we would tell the story that Joseph was a man of, when he was free to do whatever he wanted. Of course, he must have been even more successful. Yet the Torah says nothing about Joseph's success in the early part of his life, even though he was free. When he becomes a servant or a prisoner, that's when he becomes successful. What does this mean? What's going on here? Keep that question. We'll answer it later. What?
I think I have an answer.
You do?
I think so.
Okay. You want to give it a try for 20 seconds?
Yaakov was a tzaddik, so obviously where he was, the land was prosperous, and where he moved to and lived with his children would also be prosperous, and they were on the coattails of their father.
And therefore what?
A success, everything that the father.
It doesn't say that about the father either. It doesn't say it about anyone. It's the first time in the Torah that it tells us about someone that was successful was Yosef. It uses that word. He was successful. And when he's no longer free, when he's in other people's charge, what is the meaning of this? Your answers are good. I hear what you're saying, but let me give a different angle to this. Let me explain it in a different way. I want to ask another question. The other question I'm going to ask is, and I'm going to point this out. I'm going to read it again because it's very important. There are nuances here in the way the Torah describes Joseph's success. I'm going to read again from chapter 39, verses 1 and 2, and pay attention to the differences, because there are going to be. With the Torah is describing his success in his master's home, when he's a servant in Potiphar's house. Later on, the Torah describes that when he's thrown into prison in Egypt, there too he's very, very successful. But there's a big difference. What's the difference? When he's in his master's home, as a servant in his home, the Torah says like this, and I quote chapter 39 of Genesis, verse 2 and 3. Or rather, verse 3. I'm just going to read 3. Joseph's master saw that God was with him. God was with Joseph. That God granted Joseph success in everything he did. And I'm going to read the Hebrew words also because I think this is important. The Torah says that everything he did, the master saw that everything Joseph did, Hashem matzliach biyado. Hashem makes successful in his hand. Meaning whatever Joseph's hands did, Hashem made successful. Okay? But when you go to the description of his success in prison, it's different. And I'm going to read that too. It's the same chapter, 39, verse 23. And over there it talks about the warden. The warden of the prison could not find fault in anything that was under Joseph, under his charge, for God was with him. And then in Hebrew it says, Vasher hu isa Hashem matzliach, whatever he did, Hashem was successful. It doesn't say Hashem was successful in his hands. In other words, in everything that he did. In the first case it says that whatever he put his hands, Hashem made successful. In the second description, it says, whatever Joseph was involved with, Hashem was successful. Not that Hashem made Joseph successful. Hashem was successful. In other words, in the first case, Hashem is making Joseph successful. In the second case, Hashem is successful. What does this mean? Why? It's an interesting the way it's put. Yeah? You get the question? No, you don't have to guess. We'll guess it for, we'll tell you. So let me describe to you. When we talk about this whole story, we need to appreciate what does it mean to have success? What is success? Where does success come from? What makes a person successful? What does success even mean? The word hatzlacha in Hebrew. Get used to that word because I use it a lot. Hatzlacha or hatzlacha in modern Hebrew. What does success mean? So one of the great, Hasidic masters, known as the Tzemach Tzedek, he was the third Lubavitcher Rebbe. He explains the word hatzlacha, and he says it's we say a successful person. This guy's a lucky person, right? A man, he's lucky. Everything turns out good for him. He's got luck. A man of luck, good luck. What does luck mean? So in Hebrew, the word for luck, which is associated to success, is called mazel, right? Good luck, right? Mazel tov, right? When someone says, I had a baby, I got engaged, my daughter is mazel tov. What's mazel tov? Good luck. But it's much more than that. The word mazel means, it comes from the biblical term nozel, meaning it drips. Something's dripping from, what does dripping mean? Water drips from a high place to a low place. When we say mazel, it comes from the word nozel, which means dripping, and the connotation is that for this person, there's some godly dripping going on. God is making things good for him. It's dripping for him from heaven. Things are going good for him. He's got blessings dripping for him from heaven. That's what mazel means. That's what luck means. Luck doesn't just mean, he hit the jackpot. The dice fell on the right way. Luck means that God is making this person successful. That's what success means. You have a special blessing from above, right? But there are two types of success. In other words, before we get to two types, it's clear that mazel, when a person has success, like he's lucky, he's got good luck and things are going well for him, if it's based, sometimes a person works hard and he does okay. He worked very hard, he did even better. But that's not what luck is. When we talk about a person successful, lucky, we're talking about some kind of extraordinary success. A success that is beyond the effort that man puts in. It's almost like, when a person, everything he touches turns to gold. What does that mean? That he works hard? That's not what that means. Because you have a lot of people that work hard. And they do okay. This person, it's like an extraordinary blessing from heaven. Everything he touches turns into gold. What does that mean? That it's a greater level of success. That's what we mean when we say mazel. The guy has mazel. It's dripping to him from heaven. It's not his doing. He's not the one that's creating his result. This result. It's coming from a higher place. It's coming through his work. True, but it's coming from a higher place. When we talk about success that comes from a higher place, which is what we're talking about, that's what real success means, that it's vivid, it's very clear. It's very clear that this person has a blessing from heaven. There are two ways that can manifest itself. Number one, with a person, number one is when a person works and he does his thing, he engages. You see that something extraordinary is happening. It's not his doing. In other words, this is not something that humans can make happen for themselves. It's obviously a blessing from Hashem. But the blessing comes through man's effort. It's coming through the man's work, the person's work. It is indeed above his capacity to produce such success, but Hashem is working. You can see it's manifesting itself through his own work, through his hands, through his deeds. The second level, which is even higher than that, even much more significant, is that the success is so beyond, it's so incredible, it's so otherworldly that you can't even associate it with anything the person's doing. It's like, oh, you see what he did? Look what that turned out to be. It's not what he did. You see right away that it's God's. The whole thing is from God. It's all supernatural. It's a whole different situation. Things are supernatural. Supernatural. No one's going to say that this happened by the hands of man. Like we're going to go to Hanukkah now, yeah? Maybe this is a good example. What happened in Hanukkah? No, I'm not talking about the miracle of light. I'm talking about the war, let's say. The miracle of lights of the 8 days, that's nothing to do with man. It's not so that to begin, it's like the splitting of the sea. Splitting of the sea is not, no, man didn't do anything. You know what I'm saying? It's God made it happen. That's it. Yeah, Moshe hit the stone, struck a stone, but struck with his he took a staff and hit the water. But let's talk about the war that the Jews fought in the story of Hanukkah against the Greeks. There were tiny number of soldiers. They were not well armed. They had nothing. There was absolutely no way that they should win a war. It was a completely supernatural event. So God makes the miracle happen for them, yeah? So what are you going to say? Wow, they had great strategy. They had perfect general. It's not that type of success. The 6 Day War, it's older, you can argue. Those are wars, you had, even there you could say that it was God's doing. I don't remember the 6 Day War, but if those of you who's listening and remember that was also one of those situations where it was God's doing. But by the Hanukkah story for sure. You didn't attribute it to, that wasn't, God made the soldiers successful. The soldiers were just, a byproduct. There was nothing there. There was God made this happen from beginning to end. You understand what I'm saying? There's sometimes a person who's so successful, that success is so beyond, you can't even say everything this man touches turns to gold. It's such a type of success, it's such a type of mazel luck that man's deeds are not even, you don't even attribute it to what the person is doing, because to begin with you see, wow, this is absolutely godly, that which is going on for this person. The minute you look at the result and what happened here, oh, God worked miracles here. God worked this. This is all God's doing. In the first case, man is putting his hands on something. He puts his hands, it turns to gold. But you attribute it to man's doing, and God is blessing his handiwork. God's blessing in a great way is dripping for him from heaven a great success through his hands. In the second case, there's no man's hands. He's he's a superfluous player here. The minute you look at the story, you realize God's working wonders here. You understand? There's a difference. That was the difference between these two success stories of Joseph. When he was in Potiphar's house, how does the Torah describe his success? That his master saw that he was successful, and that everything he did, God made, what's the words? That v'chol asher hu ha'isa, everything that he is doing, he's a man of success, and everything he does, Hashem makes successful through his hands. It says in his hands, Hashem matzliach biyodei. Hashem makes successful in his hands. In other words, in the house of Potiphar, there was a man, Yosef, he was working, he was engaged, and God made his hands, his actions, tremendously successful. You were able to detect that this is beyond normal success, but you attributed it to some degree to Yosef's hands. He was involved, he was engaged. In the prison, the warden also sees that Joseph is tremendously successful. But over there it doesn't say Hashem matzliach b'yodei, that God is successful in Yosef, God's making Yosef's hands successful. Over there it says everything he does, Hashem is successful. Why does it say Hashem is successful? Because the success was so extraordinary and so beyond anything that's humanly even. There's no human contribution almost. The minute you look at the story, you're seeing God. In other words, Yosef is totally a conduit for God's success. He's like a conduit for something beyond him. In the first case, God is working through Joseph, and Joseph is a player. He's a player. He's got hands, he's working. And God is making his hand, everything his hand touches turned to gold. In the second case, it's not his hands touches. He's a complete conduit. In other words, God's shining through him completely. He doesn't exist. The minute you look at this man and everything he's doing and everything about him, you see God. He's a reflection of God. God's reflected through him. You don't even attribute it to Yosef. That's why it doesn't say God successful through his hands. It says God succeeded because it was God. Now, what's the difference? Indeed, why as a servant in Potiphar's house, he was successful and it was great. But over there, his hands are a player. His actions are a player. He's a player. In the case of the prison, he's not a player. It's all God. The minute you see what's going on, you see right away God's involved. This is all God. Why? What was the difference? What changed? You follow till now? You understand? Okay. The difference is, in the house of Potiphar, he was a slave, a servant. In the prison, he was a prisoner. What's the difference? What makes a person successful? When I say successful, again, I'm going back to what I quoted from the Holy Tzemach Tzedek, who said that success that we're referring to over here means that it's dripping from heaven. In other words, it's a supernatural, if you will, success. And we divide it in two ways. The supernatural that goes through man's hands, and then there's a supernatural that you see right away, this is all God's doing. What brings about such success? Why don't regular people have that success? And how do you achieve such success? The answer is, there is it says like this. What is that? Yeah. In order to be successful, to receive from heavenly blessing like that type of blessing from heaven, let me describe it to you this way. Man, by definition, is distant from God. How so? What's God? In other words, when I say man, what do I mean by that? You and me and all of us. We're creation. We're created beings. We're defined, we exist, we take up space, we feel our own existence, we give it great importance. Right? We have our own little egos or big egos. We feel ourselves, we know ourselves, we recognize that we are important. We recognize our own importance. Right? What's the truth? The truth is that there's only one important being in this world. There's only one true being in this world, which is God. The more I feel myself and my own importance, my own existence, the more distant I am from Hashem. The more I submit and I self-efface, the more I am connected to God. How do you connect to God in the greatest possible way? What's true connection to Hashem? Your own self-effacement. The less you exist, the closer you are to Hashem, because you're reflecting a deeper truth. What's the real? When we pay our own existence homage and we pay our own existence attention, we give too much attention to our own existence, we're almost promulgating a lie. What's the lie? That I'm important. I'm not important. The only true important existence in this world is God. So the less I'm important, the less I flaunt or pay attention to my own existence and give it importance, the closer I am to the truth, which is that there is only one existence, one true important existence, and that is God. In other words, the key word in Hebrew is bittul. Bittul means self-effacement. You're not, you're humble. You're not. You don't take yourself too seriously. I mean that in a good way, not in a bad. Some people don't take themselves seriously. They become depressed and they can commit suicide. I'm not important. I don't need to live. I'm not talking about that kind of not feeling your own importance. I mean taking yourself too seriously. My ego. I want now this and get out of my way. That type of importance. That is a contradiction to God. So where do you get? So the closer you are to God, the more successful you're going to be. God's going to bless you more. The more you're going to have godly flow from heaven for you, right? The distant you are, the further you are from God, it's going to be less. So the key for this is bittul. The key for this is where your own importance becomes a little less, secondary. Where you put yourself aside for Hashem, for others, for God, and so on. I'm not important. I don't exist because I need to exist. Because I'm important. I want to exist. I want to eat now something tasty, and my temptation now takes over everything. Such a person is not close to Hashem. Has almost nothing to do with Hashem. At least at those moments. What happened was, when Yosef ended up as a servant, a slave, in the house of Potiphar, what happened? Let's remind everyone watching. On Facebook, everywhere else. On Zoom, what happened over here? Yosef was taken from his father's clutches, from his father's lap almost. He was a young 17-year-old. He was in Israel in the warmth of his father's embrace, his father's home, and his brother sold him as a slave, and he ended up in a foreign land in Egypt. Can you imagine? And what happens to him over there? He's bought. He belongs to someone else. He belongs to someone else. To who? To Potiphar. Which was he was a big servant, a big minister in Pharaoh's court. So right away, Yosef becomes a Evan. Now, Yosef was a tzaddik. Yosef was a holy man. And what is a holy man? What is the definition of a holy man? One of the definitions is that everything that he sees, that his life down here reflects a higher truth. He recognizes that what's happening to him in this world is really a reflection of his spiritual state, right? So if he's a servant to Pharaoh's chieftain, to Pharaoh's minister, that was a reflection also that meant that he himself became more of a servant to God. You understand? In other words, becoming a servant over here was not just, very terrible, I'm a servant, I was sold and terrible, right? To Joseph, that was a reflection of, now that I'm a servant, what does that mean for me in my spiritual life? I have to become a servant to God, a greater servant to God, right? So when he became a servant to Pharaoh, in a way, he went down in the physical, in his social situation. He's away from his father's house, and all. But in a way, he utilized that to become even closer to God, become a servant, a greater servant to Hashem. Because he said, wait a minute, this got to be divine. Something is happening in my life so significant. I have to utilize that. I have to see what's God doing here. He's meaning to tell me that it's time to become a greater servant of Hashem. So what does that mean? Yosef becomes more humbled, less important. His own importance became less obvious. He reduced, he lowered his own importance. I'm a servant. I belong to someone else. So belonging to someone else in the physical world, to another human being, is a bad idea. It's not good to have a slave or to become a slave. But if it can reflect becoming a servant to Hashem, that's a great thing. So he became more he became more bottle. He became more self-effaced. He became more humble. He became a greater reflection of God, and therefore closer to God. The more he puts away his own ego, he's serving something higher, he becomes closer to the higher. And therefore he's more of a vessel. He's an open channel to greater blessings from Hashem. So it's only in the house of Potiphar that he reaches such an extraordinary level of success, because he became much closer to Hashem. He became a servant to Hashem. Whereas before he was a servant also. He was a good man, he was all good, but not to this level. What's the difference between a servant and a prisoner? What did we say before that? When he was a servant, he had success, but it wasn't total success. You attribute it still to Yosef. Hashem was making his hands, Yosef the man, successful. In the prison, it doesn't even describe it that way. In the prison, he's described as being a successful. His success was God's success. Hashem was successful. Why? Because over there he became even more self-effaced. Why in prison was he even more closer to God? Because what's the difference between a servant and a prisoner? A servant you bought, someone wants you to work for him. You're hired to work, basically. That's what a servant over here means. He's hired to work on not just a job like we have today. Today we don't have servants. We have employees. This is not an employee. This is a greater level of, you belong to someone else. Yeah. So he's the servant of Pharaoh's minister. Correct? What does it say? It says about that a servant, everything he does, if a servant finds $1,000 in the street, belongs to his master. Everything he does belongs to his master. That's the definition of a servant. In Torah, in Halacha, probably maybe in secular laws, we don't have servants today anymore, we don't have slaves today. But when there was, you were owned, and it was all belonged to the master, the owner. Right? But as a servant, you don't stop existing. Your existence is important still. What you do belongs to your owner. But you're there to serve. You're hired. You were taken into the owner's house, to the master's house, because you have abilities, you have good hands, you have good talents. He wants you to work for him, and what you do is important. So as a servant, you're not completely in a selfless existence. You do exist. You're right. I exist for someone else. Everything I do ends up belonging to my master, but my work is important, and I did it. It's attributed to me. What about a prisoner? A prisoner loses his sense of self completely. He's stripped completely of all his rights. He's nobody. In fact, he's forced to not work. You stop being effective. You stop being a contributor to society. Unfortunately, I'm not saying it's a good thing, a bad thing. Prison is not a good thing. Not for in Torah law, we don't have prison for that reason. In the Torah, there's no prison because of that. Because what does it mean to take a prison and he stops being effective? He's just sitting in the room looking at the ceiling for 10 hours a day or more. That's not a Torah ideal in any circumstance. But in a real prison, that's what happens. They take away your ability to function, period. And when they do have you do something, sometimes in prisons they make you work, it's against your will. They're forcing you to work. They're forcing you to work. And what happens when you force someone to work? You can't even attribute the work to that person. Halacha, there's also such a concept. Imagine if I forced you, someone comes and forces me to eat non-kosher food. Do I get punished? Certainly not. I ate it against my will. It's not only, all right, we won't punish you. It's beyond that. We don't even consider it as if you did it. The person who forced you, it's his action. He did it. Right? Because it was against your will. In other words, a prisoner, it's not by a servant. We say the servant did a great job. It belongs to the master, but the servant contributed. He did it. We clap our hands for him. We elevate him. He exists. He's not a total non-existent being. The prisoner doesn't exist. He has no function. He has no purpose. And anything that he does do is forced upon him. So it's not attributed to him. It's as if he's not doing anything. So he's totally existenceless, if you understand what I'm saying. That was Joseph in the prison. And as such, because he was such a holy person, so he realized that if I'm in prison now, my existence completely took on a non-existence. I'm a nobody here. I'm totally self-effaced. So he felt that, he turned that around towards God. So it made him even more bottle, if you understand what that word is, if you remember what that word means, self-effaced for God. He lost his existence to become one with Hashem. I don't exist. It's not that I exist for God. That's a servant. In that case, where he was a prisoner, his feeling towards God was, I don't exist. I don't exist. I'm a reflection of God. You look at me, you see God. And that's how it was. The warden looked at him, this person, it's a reflection of God. God's successful. You remember the words? When they're describing the success of Joseph in prison, it's because he was so one with Hashem, because he didn't have any vestige of his own existence. He didn't feel it at all. He was totally, nullified existence. So he turned it around to become himself. That's where I am in this physical world, under other people's control. I may as well transfer that to Hashem. And that's where he became totally one with Hashem. He lost his existence in godliness. In other words, you looked at Joseph, you saw a reflection of God. That's all you saw. You didn't see Yosef, because he didn't stand out at all. And therefore, everything what he ended up being involved with was never attributed to him. It was God successful. The warden looked at him, he saw God successful here. This is God's success. This is something of a completely different nature. It's like you're looking at the splitting of the sea. Wow, look what Moses did. He struck this water. No one said that. No one said, look what Moses did. What a miracle worker he is. You saw right away God's working here. This is not attributed to any person. This is to begin with God's doing. That's how they saw Joseph in prison. He was so successful that it was almost like God was shining success through him. And therefore doesn't even use the words through his hands, through his work. Because my work means I'm already someone. In prison he was no one completely, but he turned that in to be completely one with Hashem and not to feel his own existence, to be nullified to Hashem completely. So when it comes, so you should never feel that way towards him. You should never lose your existence in another being, to a warden. God forbid, that's a terrible thing. There's no advantage there. To lose your existence in God, that is a great advantage. And so Yosef was very involved in prison. They put everything in his charge, but they viewed this, and they bumped into him. It's almost like they said, Look what God's doing here. It was right away God's doing. They realized right away there were successes of such a nature that is a completely different level. And that's why we don't talk about his success before he ended up in prison. That's why the first time the Torah describes him as successful is when he's in Egypt, when he's a servant. Because when was he able to become so successful? When he was less of a when he felt his existence less and less and less and less. The less he felt himself, the more successful he became. The more one with it. Because what's success? That which comes from heaven. The closeness to Hashem. God's working through you. So the closer you are to Him, and the more you lose your existence in Him, the more He's going to be there. The more He's going to drip to you. You get that? Yes or no? Which brings me, what?
I don't even know if this is a good question. Was Yaakov more righteous than Joseph, or did Joseph reach a different parallel or a different level of righteousness than his father?
Who, Joseph?
Yes.
It's clear that from the Torah that when we talk about a successful person, this type of success, where it's totally extraordinary levels of success, where it's almost godly, that was only with Joseph. He's the first person that we see such a thing.
By Yaakov, you have the other level of success?
We don't have any, the word success doesn't appear by Yaakov, I don't think. He had God's blessing and all that, but this type of thing where it's dripping through him and at the level where it's extraordinary, and he's, this we find by Joseph. Which brings me to the conclusion of this point, to the story of the Alter Rebbe. This past Shabbos was the 19th day of the Hebrew month of Kislev, and that was the day that the first Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Shneur Zalman, the famous Hasidic master, was released from prison. And by him also, you saw these two levels of success. These two levels of success. He was a prisoner. You know the story with his imprisonment? Basically, he was accused by those that wanted to destroy the Hasidic movement. There was opposition at that time when Hasidism started, and there was great opposition, a lot of heartache for the Hasidim. From other Jews, it wasn't like it. And they really hated the Hasidim, and they wanted to destroy the Hasidic movement. How do you destroy the Hasidic movement? You eliminate the leader, you eliminated the whole thing. So they went after Rabbi Shneur Zalman, because he was the leader at the time of the Hasidic movement in Russia over there. How did they do it? They falsely accused him of treason. They sent libelous reports to the Tsar, literally to the Tsar. And they said that he's cooperating with, what happened was, he was sending money to Israel, to a certain charity there, which he promoted, he built and made. It's still around, that charity, by the way. It's called Chabad. He started it, and he would send lots of money there. And he would raise money and he would send, they would help the poor. So it was. Problem was that Israel then was under Turkish rule. And Turkey was an enemy of Russia. So they falsified papers showing that he sent money that he didn't really, they added zeros to the documents and made it sound like he's sending over there who knows how much money to undo the Tsar, to cooperate with the enemy. You understand what I'm saying? So they accused him of treason. And he ended up in prison. While in prison, he was interrogated by the Russians, by the Tsar's people, by the Tsar's ministers, right? And and we're told, and there's a whole diary, and there's a lot written about that imprisonment. Alter Rebbe himself said what happened to him. And he writes, and the Chassidim will relate later that, related and it's written, that the ministers and the interrogators that came to his cell to interrogate him and to talk to him and to find out and and to investigate, they were so impressed with him that they saw that he's a godly person. They will recognize that he's a holy man. They tell the story that when it's a famous story that when he was in prison, one of the Tsar's people, ministers, a very smart man, a very learned man, an intelligent person, actually someone that was he had a broad knowledge of biblical text and even the commentators, as you will see in a minute. He asked the Alter Rebbe, "Can I ask you a question?" After he finished interrogating him, and he was highly impressed, he asked the Alter Rebbe the following question. It says by Adam and Eve that after they ate from the tree of knowledge, it says that God was, they recognized that they were undressed, the whole story there, and they went and hid. So God, it says that God called out to Adam and said, "Adam, where are you? Ayeka, where are you?" So he asked the Alter Rebbe, he says, what does it mean that God is asking, where are you? God doesn't know where he is. He's omniscient. He knows everything. So what does it mean, where are you? So the Alter Rebbe asked him and said to him, do you believe that the Torah is eternal with lessons? No, so first the Alter Rebbe told him that what Rashi says, that God tried to get into a conversation with him, not to overwhelm him. Why'd you do what I told you not to do? So he asks him, where are you? Kind of like an entry, a segue into a conversation with him. So he asks him, where are you? So he tells the Alter Rebbe, I know what Rashi says. That interpretation I know. But I want to hear what your interpretation is. Interesting. So the Alter Rebbe asked him, do you believe that the Torah is eternal with lessons for all times and all places? He says, I do. He says, when God called to Adam, he was really it's a call to every human being. Adam means man, right? All man. God's calling to every single human being. And he said, God asks a person, you lived for 53 years, and so many months, and so many weeks, and so many days, and so many hours. Where are you in life? Are you fulfilling your mission? And shockingly, the Alter Rebbe said exactly in I think it was 53, the exact age of this person, by the day, by the hour. I mean, amazing. And he was like, he couldn't believe what he heard. He realized right away he was standing before a very godly person, someone that knows how did he know how old this guy was to the hour, to the minute. So he realized right away we're talking about a man of God. A man of God. In prison, interestingly enough, later when the Alter Rebbe went out of prison, he was finally released on the 19th day of Kislev, which was this past Shabbos, or to be exact, on the 20th. They told him on the 19th, but he left prison on the 20th. That's why both days are a holiday. He wrote a letter afterwards, and after the letter he says that the wise men of these czarist, the ministers and the king himself, and the Tsar himself became familiar with Alter Rebbe. They tell the story that when the Tsar himself came to visit Alter Rebbe in the prison cell. That's what happened. And as soon as the Tsar walked in, the Alter Rebbe stood up for him. And he didn't come looking like a king. He came looking like a regular commoner, maybe like a minister. So he said, why are you standing up? She says, you're the king, you're the Tsar. She says, how do you know I'm the Tsar? He says, so many people came to visit you. How do you know them? So he says, whenever the others came in, I didn't experience or feel kingship walk in. When you walked in, I felt Malchus came in. Kingship came in, because he was a king. So the Tsar was right, again, totally moved. But Alter Rebbe writes that afterwards, he wrote a letter after he was released, that the ministers, and I'll quote to you, that even in the eyes of the non-Jewish ministers of the Tsar, they realized that this was a complete, wondrous type of situation. his release. And Me'es Hashem Hoyzeh, this is all godly. And the Rebbe explains in this essay that the Alter Rebbe in prison and when he went out of prison was similar to Joseph as a servant and later in prison. When he was in prison, it was the first level of success. They saw that the Alter Rebbe is something of a different nature, like the minister, his master saw Joseph. Whatever he puts his hand to is gold. God's with him in everything he does. In the Alter Rebbe in prison was the first level. Everything he does, God makes successful. They saw it. Once he left prison, he reached a new level of bittul, a new level of self-effacement. Where he was one with Hashem, his existence was completely annulled. And therefore, what shone through him, he became a conduit for complete revelation of Hashem. In other words, anyone that learned of the Alter Rebbe at that point realized this must have been a complete. They saw, like in the prison by Joseph, it's God's success. It's not even Joseph's success. That even in the eyes of the ministers, he was completely on a different level. So by the Alter Rebbe was in prison, and right after that, he reached those two levels. By Yosef, it was the master's house, and then when he was a prisoner. It's a good question why the Alter Rebbe in prison didn't reach the level that Joseph reached in prison. We'll leave that for a different time. What's the lesson for all of us of this essay? It's great to know that Yosef reached high levels. It's wonderful, no? You want to have success in life, there's really one way to reach that level of success. The less you are important, the less your importance, the less you feel yourself, the less your ego is inflated, the more the more you become a conduit and a channel for godliness, and therefore for success, for godly success. If you want to get a job and do good work and get a paycheck at the end and live your life, you can do that. A lot of people do that. We're talking about a success on a different level. That really, it's extraordinary. Whatever you touch, whatever you do becomes successful. You don't fail. Everything you do is success. How do you reach that level? You've got to be in touch with God. You got to be a conduit for Hashem. There's two levels in being a conduit for Hashem. The two levels of Joseph. Now, we're not Joseph, and we're never going to become Joseph. That's a different type of person. It's a holy person. But we learn these stories to teach us something about ourselves. Something about ourselves. The Rebbe once said, what's the sign of a sick limb? How do you know you're sick? When you start feeling yourself. When you start feeling your hand, you better go, it's time to go to a doctor, right? That's pain. That's called pain. When you start feeling your legs and other body parts, your lungs, your heart, when you start feeling these things, you're not healthy. There's a problem. The less you feel yourself, the healthier you are. It's spiritually that way too. The less you feel your own ego and existence, the more you're connected to healthy thinking, to healthy living, to Hashem basically. It's a reflection of Hashem. A sick person is someone that feels himself. That's true physically, it's true spiritually. And when you don't feel yourself, when you let yourself become, flattened, I'm here to serve. I'm here for others. I'm here for my spouse. I'm here for people in life. I'm here to serve. I'm not here to be served. What's in it for me? When you have the feeling, what's in it for me? What's my part of the bargain? You're not going to be a ish matzliach, a lucky guy. You're not going to have that type of luck, that kind of mazel, as we say. So it's not an easy thing, obviously, not to feel yourself. What does that mean? I mean, I wake up in the morning, I feel myself. I know I'm aware of myself. I'm suddenly hungry. I'm suddenly, at night I'm suddenly tired. I feel myself all the time. Obviously, we're not talking about high levels of Joseph type of, submission. But to some degree. And that's the key to success, I'm telling you. The godly success, the extraordinary success, the less you're aware of your own importance It doesn't mean you're not an important person. Every person has an important mission to fulfill in this life. In fact, the rabbis tell us every person has to say to himself, the whole world was created for me. Now that sounds like something so arrogant. I don't know how the rabbis ever put that in the Mishnah. How could they ever promote such a thought process, such a concept? The whole world was created just for me? How? Only an arrogant person could say such a thing. But the answer is, the rabbis mean something else. The whole world is on my shoulders. I have to do something, and without which the whole world goes down. That's a different kind of, that's not arrogance. On the contrary, that's a complete feeling of, my goodness, how dare I think about myself too much? I better get busy with my mission immediately, because the whole world is dependent on it. So why am I getting caught up with my petty, stupid needs? So it's the other way around. The more you think about the importance of your mission, of your service to Hashem, the less arrogant you become. It's the other way around. We're not. So when I say we should not feel our own importance, I don't mean it. I'm not needed. That's not what I mean. I mean your petty importance, your petty silliness. I want this right now because I feel the need. What do you mean feel? Who cares about your needs? No one's interested in your needs. We need you to serve. What are you here to do? What can you contribute to this world? And the more you do that, and the less you feel your own self, the more connected you are to Hashem, and the more you open yourself up to extraordinary levels of godly success. First this level, then the higher level. But any level. The more you're connected to Hashem, you go from being a servant to a prisoner. A prisoner, I don't mean a prisoner quite literally. I mean where you totally don't exist. In other words, your whole self is selfless. Then you're open to the highest level. It's God's success. You don't even it's not even attributed to you because it's so obvious that there's something beyond you happening through you, so that no one even talks about you. You understand? The minute they see, wow, look what God's doing here. It's a different level of success. It's like the Alter Rebbe when he was released from prison. The whole world was awed by what happened to him. They saw right away this is something of a different age. When they saw Moses split the sea, they saw right away God. They saw God. It was not Moses. They saw right away that this is something extraordinarily godly. So we're not splitting seas, but we can reach somewhat of a commitment and a level of connection to Hashem, and therefore to have that kind of mazel drip, 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 drip down to us, through us, to the point where people are awestruck, and we're stricken. So that's the story. Next Tuesday, by the way, we're having a couple, let me announce it here already if everyone's watching on Facebook and those that are watching. So here's like this. Monday night, we're going to be lighting the menorah at Town Center as we do every year. Only this time we're going to broadcast it live from there with the mayor, with the commissioners. We'll all be there. But it's going to be a Zoom event because people are not going to come, so we're going to broadcast it on Zoom. We have great entertainment. We have an illusionist from South Africa that's extraordinary, and he's going to do a whole show online, and he's going to engage people. Very interesting. That's Monday night. Tuesday night, we have a fantastic Zoom event as well with Rabbi Manis Friedman, one of the most sought-out speakers today in the Jewish world. And he's going to be speaking to our community on Zoom. I will be sending out all this information, all the links, and I hope you'll all join us. So next Tuesday night, it's not going to be this class, me speaking. It's going to be Rabbi Friedman. That's going to be at 7:30. And Monday at Town Center, or in your living room, watching Town Center, will be at 5:45. As the sun goes down, starting to get dark, we'll light the menorah. If a few of you want to come visit us, be there at the Town Center, sure, by all means. They said you can bring up to 50 people, no problem. But they don't want the hundreds and hundreds every year because of the pandemic. So we're doing it through Zoom. There's going to be music and entertainment, and I wish I see you all. Hopefully we'll see you all. And when you do come on, open your cameras. So we can see, we can have a big screen over there and everyone's going to see each other. It's going to be very nice. Oh, now you open your camera. Anyway, have a good night, everyone. A happy Hanukkah. And we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Erev Tov, Rabbi. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Hanukkah Sameach.